Welcome back to Racing Rundown around the world this week here on Racing Rundown. Today we have a very straightforward Racing Rundown around the world segment. We're talking about the Group 1 Irish Oaks from the Curragh this weekend. 8 horses are lined up for this race, and this is going to be very similar to the way the first half of last week's Racing Rundown around the world went. In terms of, we have another one of John Gosden's fillies, and actually, ironically, in addition to the fact that it's a very on paper one-dimensional race, the filly that we're also referencing as a one-dimensional can't lose type is also trained by John Gosden, ridden by Frankie Dettori. Of course, we're talking about the hard luck Oaks runner-up Emily Upjohn in here. There's 8 horses in this race, as I already mentioned. And the way I'm going to do this is, obviously, you don't need me to tell you that Emily Upjohn is a super high-class filly. Very impressive 2 trials going into Epsom. She missed the break entirely. Very narrowly got beat by Tuesday. Very close to getting up in that spot. And the thing I will say about Emily Upjohn is when I talk to people that I talked to after the race about that, the quote that I was saying the whole time was Emily Upjohn's going to be very difficult to beat in Ireland because I just assumed this would be the next logical spot for her. And that certainly has been the spot for her. So I'm not going to be foolish here and try to pick against Emily Upjohn here. But I'm not going to, just say, okay, Emily Upjohn's going to win, and that's it for this week's segment of Racing Rundown around the world. Because it did that last week, and in Spiral, not only did Inspiral lose, but she also lost to a horse who I picked at Ascot. So that was certainly very annoying for me. Not only did the horse that I said was going to win in a procession easily lose, she also lost to a horse that I happened to quite like, and it would have been nice to have given Prosperous Voyage a little bit more of a chance there. So I'm going to go about this in a couple of ways. Obviously, Emily Upjohn's my pick, but I'm going to talk about your alternatives if you want to beat Emily Upjohn in here. And I'll start off by talking about the 3 Aidan O'Brien horses in here. Emily Dickinson, History, and Toy. And I'm just going to say I'm very anti-Aidan O'Brien in this race. I don't like any of his 3 horses. I'll get to Emily Dickinson, who's the one of the 3 that I like the most. But I got to History first. History was beaten last time at Ascot by Magical Lagoon in the Ribblesdale. And before that, she was well beaten in the Irish Guineas. And then she was also, she won in her first start of the year over Argatha, who didn't run too well at Belmont Park this past week in the Belmont Oaks. So that's History out for you. I'll go to Toy, who is the one that, she's the highest on the in the markets right now. So obviously, she's the one that I would, just by that, the one that I would think the least of. And that is true. I do think the least of her. Very well beaten in the French Oaks. Not as much in terms of a margin, but she was very far back in the French Guineas. So not really Group 1 form going in. She's not bad, but she's also not good. That's a very crude description of her. One dimensional, not good, but not bad. But again, in this race, she has not been Group 1 form this year, and I don't really see how she's going to step up to Group 1 form. I will talk about Emily Dickinson, though. She is the shortest of the 3, which, again, being rather cliche here, but I think she's got the best chance of the 3, and it's because she's coming out of a narrow defeat going 1.75 miles. And I think the big thing with this is she's shown that the distance isn't really an issue for her. She was beaten in another trial going into that, or before that race, by almost 4 lengths by Rogue Millennium there. So form's not great for Emily Dickinson, but as I said, I'm against all 3 of the O'Briens. But if you must have one of them, Emily Dickinson, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the public right now, is the one that you've got to have. Magical Lagoon makes a lot of sense as your alternative, but she's the second choice here, so she's the obvious one. You might see on my screen, there is one other horse here. This is Cardiga Joe. She's coming out of a victory over Boundless Ocean, last time going 1.5 miles. Start before that was going 1.5 furlongs. So she's clearly gotten the distance, and that victory going 1.5 furlongs was an 8-length victory. And she was also beaten. I've referenced this race countless times. It was one that Concert Hall was in, and I was a very big backer of Concert Hall in the Pretty Polly. This was behind Concert Hall and Magical Lagoon, but that was going 1.25 miles, and I think that this is a filly who improves going 1.5 miles. So I'm gonna, just be a little bit not super cliche and try to get a little bit creative in this and say, if a horse is going to beat Emily Upjohn, it's going to be her. And if you're going to bet any horse underneath in this race to place or anything like that, that's the horse I would use. Yes, obviously Magical Lagoon is the obvious alternative, but you're not going to make any money off of her. And again, I think Emily Upjohn's going to win this race. I don't see how she loses, but I'm trying to make this a little bit more than, oh, Emily Upjohn's going to win, and that's the end of the story. So the one in this race, Cortica Joe, is the horse that I would say, if you got to pick against Emily Upjohn, she's the one that I would use. And then if you asked me to pick a horse to bet to place underneath, that's the horse that I'm going to use, given the form that she has at the distance of 1.5 miles and a little bit further, and then given the price, because this is also a price play on top of everything else. So hopefully we're able to help you out with something here. Again, this is a very one-dimensional race because Emily Upjohn is the clear favorite here, and I'm disappointed that this is another segment of this where we don't really have too much analysis to get in here. But hopefully we'll be able to get a winner this time. We've been on a bit of a dry spell with this, and of course a couple very annoying defeats last week. But we're hopefully going to get back on the right track here. Next week, we'll be talking about the King George at Ascot. I'm personally very excited for that race. So we'll see you back here next week. And if you haven't already, be sure to check out our preview of the Grade 1 Diana at Saratoga this weekend. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.